All right, we're here to talk about the Apple TV remote. This is the new remote for the 2022 Apple TV 4K model. Love the Apple TV, got a whole bunch of content about it on the channel. Check those other videos out. But I had a problem recently with this remote. I do use it to volume control the audio processing in my living room, the Anthem STR, and out of the blue, about a week or so ago, the volume control stopped working. It basically appeared like this was no longer emitting IR. I've got the Apple TV set up to volume control the Anthem via the IR blasters on this remote. I did the remote learning feature of the Apple TV. I don't have an HDMI CEC connection to be controlling the audio from the Apple TV through the television to the Anthem, so I have to go IR instead. But I proved to myself basically that IR on this was dead. It wasn't working. I could use the Anthem STR remote itself to control the volume, and that was working fine. So I thought I was going to get stuck. I was considering my options. How can I make this thing work again? And I thought I was going to get stuck making a Genius Bar appointment, bothering to go up to the mall, to the Apple store, and have them take a look at it and possibly replace it. Then I thought to myself, well, tech support 101, right? What should you do? What's the first thing you do when something doesn't work right? Well, restart it. And so that got me thinking about this a little bit, and kind of the fact that nowadays remote controls are much more advanced. This thing is basically a computer, like other remotes as well, a computer unto itself. In the past, a remote control was a simple logic board, some buttons, and some IR blasters, but man, now these things have Bluetooth connections and Wi-Fi connections, voice control, they're connected to the internet. It's basically, again, an entire computer. There's a processor in there and a whole bunch of advanced I/O, not just hard buttons. And because it's a computer, it has software. And so nowadays, our remote controls need to be updated just like our TVs and our game consoles or the Apple TV itself. So I went about looking for some troubleshooting tips and instructions, and I thought it was worthwhile to share those here. So first of all, if your Apple TV remote kind of goes on the fritz or doesn't seem to be working, the first thing that I would recommend doing is just plug it into power, and this is Apple's recommendation as well. Plug it into charging power for about a half an hour. Top it off, and I believe that when you have this thing plugged into power is when it will likely do its firmware updates. It's possible that the Apple TV that's connected to a given remote might try to firmware update the remote when the Apple TV itself is updated. But with most devices, you usually find that they want a firmware update while you're connected to power, because if you're in the middle of a firmware update and the battery expires or whatever, you could have a bricked device. If I were designing it, I would design this thing to basically only update if and when it was connected to power for charging. So if it's having a problem, you want to make sure it's up to date. Plug it in, USB-C, love it for the new model here, and leave it alone for a while. See if that solves the problem. And if you ever want to check it, if you go into settings under remotes, you can see specifically the serial number, the firmware version, and the battery level of your remote itself. But that didn't do it for me. That didn't fix the problem. So ultimately what I think it needed, or what solved the issue anyway, was a full reboot. So how do you reset an Apple TV remote? Well, you hold the guide button and volume down in the vicinity of your Apple TV. There's a little white light that's on the front of the Apple TV when it's operating and it's powered on. Hold those buttons down for a few seconds. That light will go off and then come back on. Let those buttons go. Wait a few more seconds and you'll see a pop-up in the corner of the Apple TV, or on your display of the Apple TV's UI, that says remote connection lost. Now it's going through a restart, it's going through a power on mode. And I was kind of surprised actually. It took a little while. Took a little while for this thing to come back, to run its restart. Maybe it's also checking for a firmware update and stuff then, but again, I'm pretty sure more likely that it would want to update firmware when it's plugged into power. But in any case, you got to give it a few minutes, I found. The restart time on this isn't exactly fast. I would have thought it would come back up literally in a matter of just like a few seconds, 10, 15 seconds. But it takes a good while longer than that. And when it does come back up and it finishes rebooting, you'll see a pop-up in the right-hand corner of the screen indicating that the remote is reconnected again. All right, so we're back up and operational. Again, took maybe a few minutes at least. Go get a cup of coffee or whatever while you're waiting. But this is what solved it for me. After this, now the IR re-engaged and I was able to control the volume of my Anthem STR like I expected to. So if you're still having trouble after a restart, the third option that they give you is basically break the connection between the remote and the Apple TV itself and repair the device. Kind of a normal, common troubleshooting step for anything that's connected to each other over Bluetooth or whatever when those connections get a little bit flaky. So if you go back into settings and you go into the remote, I'm at that screen here now again where I can see the serial number, I can see the firmware version. There is an option that will show up in here that allows you to forget the remote. But interestingly, you can't get to that option like while the remote is alive and connected and all of that. So what I found is that the way to get around that is basically do the reset of the remote itself. So while it's powered off and powered down, and then if you come into this screen, it will still show you the serial number of the connected remote, but you'll have an option at the top that says basically forget this remote, forget this device. So use your phone in the remote app of your iPhone or your iPad or some other mechanism to control the device. You can do the forget, and then after that's all done and you're ready to repair, you basically just put the remote in the vicinity of the Apple TV itself, hold the back button, the menu button, and the volume up for a little while. They recommend about 5 seconds, and then go ahead. They also recommend set the remote on the Apple TV for a little bit, and then you should see the pop-ups. It should repair and then reestablish that connection. But depending on what kind of problems you're having with it, I think will determine what maybe of those solutions is the best. Again, for me, it was the IR emitter. I think the software basically needed a reboot, so the restart worked. But if I was having integration issues, say with the remote not communicating properly with the Apple TV, then I would go for the forget and the repair. So yeah, there you go. Some troubleshooting steps for the Apple TV. A little bit of extra research saved me a trip to the Apple Store. And again, remember, these things are computers and they need to be managed like that. I do love this remote though. I'm very happy with the changes they made to it, the way it works with the ring and the touchpad combined, adding the volume buttons, the power button, and all of that. It definitely keeps the Apple TV as my main and favorite content consumption device. So if you have any questions, sound off in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Take a look at all the other Apple TV videos that are available on the channel. I cover it quite in depth. And otherwise, please do all the regular YouTube stuff. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Look down in the description for some ways to support the channel. And thanks so much for watching. Come on back for more home theater discussion and fun.